This is our chapter number 7, interviewing candidates. This is one of the another important chapter related to the human resource management course, in which we discuss the main types of selection interviews, explain and illustrate at least 6 factors that affect the usefulness of interviews, explain and illustrate each guideline for being a most effective interviewer, effectively interview a job candidate. Uh, First, I would like to explain the importance of the interview. What do you mean by the interview, and what are the good practices in the interview and when we're talking about interview, so the interview is basically conducting an interview to collect information on each candidate's job related knowledge, skills and experience in order to decide which candidate is the most suitable person for a particular role. This is the most important explanation for the term when we're talking about conducting interview. And then the second important thing which relate with the conducting interview is the interview questions. Should there be therefore be structured to enable the candidate to share and evidence their experience and interviews. Interviewers should be mindful not to make decisions based on assumptions about candidates that are linked to the interviewer's own views and opinions. So these are some of the informations I must say that related with the interview. And then here you see that a procedure designed to obtain information from a person's through oral responses to oral inquiries. We ask from the individuals related with their questions and related with their guidelines, and then the person who being called for the interview, he and she responded accordingly. Selection interview, appraisal interview, exit interview. There are 3 types of interview which normally processed in the organization. So one is the selection interview. Selection interview, as a name indicate that the one when individuals are applying for a job and you proceed for the process of the for a job, and you inquire particular individuals with respect to interview. So we can talk about the selection interview. Appraisal is basically related with when you are appraising individuals, and then the exit interview when an individual is leaving the job. So when he or she is leaving the job, so you can go for the exit interview. And appraisal is kind of the when you are appraising someone with respect to his or her annual performance or whatsoever, you can say that. Other thing is the interview format, structured interview and unstructured interview. Structured interview is that you have a series of questions designed, well planned, and you ask from a particular candidate in a series of questionnaires. That is a well planned questionnaire, that is a well planned and ordered questionnaire that you need to ask from a particular candidate. Unstructured is when you do not have any written questionnaire, defined questionnaire to ask from the candidate, and you are asking journal normal routine questions from a candidates. So this is the difference between structured and unstructured. Uh, then the types of interviews is selection interview, a selection procedure designed to predict future job performance on the basis of applicants' oral responses to oral inquiry. This is a normal selection interview that you need to inquire about the predict job performance on the basis of the applicants' responses. You need to ask their skills, you need to ask their job experience, you need to discuss about certain parameters which required for you to inquire from him or her for their performances, and as well as the current job for which individual applied for. So based on that thing, you need to inquire questions from a particular candidate. Appraisal is a discussion following a performance appraisal in which supervisor and employee discuss the employee's rating and possible remedial action. So these are the appraisal interview. Whenever you are conducting interview, in some of the organization, there is a mechanism where they conduct interview, and once they conduct the appraisal performer from a respective concerned people, for example, your manager, your colleague, your peer groups, and your customers, you collect the pro forma and you collect the appraisals forms from then. And afterwards, a manager or a reporting manager discuss the same with the employee, with the reporting person. What are the ratings and how much numbers or how much the employee get in this year, and based on that performance, based on that rating, the same will be for the promotion purposes and for the increment. And if there is any issues regarding the performance of the individual, so the remedial action is also required. By remedial action is that you need to focus on a particular reasons and you need to improve the performances of the individuals. Then exit interview, and an interview to elicit informations about the job or related matters to the employer, some insight into the what's right or wrong about the firms, and you inquire about certain parameters. Then other thing is when we relate it is the purpose. We can say that the others important element is related with the exit. It's to for future that we can improve certain parameters. Next part is the formats of interview: unstructured or non-directive interview, unstructured conversational style interview in which the interviewer pursue points of interest as they come up in response to questions. In unstructured interview, there are some non-directive interview, and that mostly ask from the ask from the applicant regarding their education, regarding their qualification, regarding their areas of interest, and based on the responses, the next questions asked from the interviewee. So this is basically, I will suggest that there is a need to follow a more of the structured interview. Is mostly in most of the cases we have gone through with the cases. So unstructured in most of the cases, if it's not relevant to the interview or to the context of the interview or to the context of the job, that create a lot of trouble and disappointment for the candidate as well. And if there is a structured or directive interview, an interview follow a set sequence of questions that is known as the structured questionnaires, or we can say that structured interview. Furthermore, is the interview content type of questions: situational interview, behavioral interview, job related interview, a series of job related questions that focus on how the candidate would behave in a given situation, that is a situational interview. Behavioral interview, a series of job related questions that focus on how they reacted to the actual situations in the past. So the interviewer asks questions related with the behavior, and the situation is interviewer asks questions related to the situation. Job related is a series of job related questions that focus on relevant past job related experience or behaviors that needs to ask from a particular candidate. Then moving further is the other thing is relate with the interview content type of questions. Stress interview, an interview in which the interviewer seeks to make the applicant uncomfortable with occasionally rude questions that supposedly to spot sensitive applicants. And we can say that to spot sensitive applicants and those with low or high stress tolerance. So these are the some stress questions that you need to check the the response of the individuals, that how they respond to the situations, and you get an idea of the personality analysis. So mostly a psychiatrics are mostly a psychological questions that you need to ask from the applicants in some situations and they responded accordingly. Then the puzzle questions is recruiters for technical, finance, and other types of jobs use questions to pose problems requiring unique out of the box solutions to see how candidates think under pressure. So the puzzle questions is that you need to discuss and then to analyze the situation that you check the out of the box solutions to see how candidates think under pressure. That you check the intensity of the individual's candidates in terms of the particular situation. Personal or individual interviews, unstructured, sequential interview, an interview in which each interviewer forms an independent opinion after asking different questions. Structured, sequential interview, an interview in which the applicant is interviewed sequentially by several persons. Each rates the applicant on a standard form. Panel interview, and an interview in which a group of interviewers questions the applicant. So there are unstructured sequential interview, and then there are the structured sequential interview, and then you have a panel interview. In the panel interview, there are people, number of people who ask questions from you one by one. And a sequential interview is that in a series of the question, the interviewer forms an independent opinion after asking different questions. So these are the sequential interviews techniques which they mostly use. Panel broad interview, an interview in which a group of interviewers questions the applicant. Same is the case when you talk about the in the previous slides panel interview. Mass interview, a panel interview several candidates simultaneously. This is also a technique, but this is not also appropriate in a sales organizations, in an organizations where they called several more than one or two or three people and ask the same questions from the persons. In such technique, when the candidates are more than 5,000 or 7,000 are for a sales jobs, they ask about the some questions. But honestly speaking, in such a situation, in a mass interview, panelists did not focus on individuals and they generate a kind of opinion for all the candidates more or like the same. However, in some cases, if there is a group or when we need a group people, so in the group, we mostly need the mass interview. Other thing is the computerized interview nowadays. This is a very generic and nowadays the computerized interview is mostly happened and the computerized selection interview, an interview in which job candidates oral and our computerized replies are obtained in response to computerized oral visual, our written questions and our situations. Then characteristics reduces amount of time managers devote to interviewing unacceptable candidates. Applicants are more honest with computers, avoids problems of interpersonal interviews. Mechanical nature of computer-aided interview can leave an applicant dissatisfied. So mostly in a computerized interviews is there is a series of questions that's come forward to you and you replied it, and then the the you can say that interviewer is not sitting there, but the in on the screen there are a series of questions is showing on the screen and you replying it to the screen, and that your reply is added or your responses are included in your profile, and afterwards someone is evaluated in a manner to check that how much you are eligible for a particular job. Factors affecting interview is first impressions. The tendency for interviewers to jump to conclusion, make snap judgments about candidates during the first few minutes of the interview. Negative bias, unfavorable information about an applicant influences interviewers more than does positive information. So these are some of the negative biases is also related it and concluded it for the any misunderstanding the job, not knowing precisely what the job entails and what sort of candidate is best suited causes interviewers to make decisions based on incorrect stereotypes of what a good applicant is. Candidates order error, an error of judgment on the part of the interviewer due to interviewing one or more very good or very bad candidates just before the interview in question. So an error of judgment on the part of interviewer due to interviewing one or more very good or bad candidates just before the interview in question. So that might be case, and these are the factors that can affect good candidates for a job. If you have a bad experience, so that bad experience can transfer to the next candidate, and if you have a good experience, that also transfer to the next candidate. You might not ask serious questions from the applicant in this situation. Misunderstanding is based on your CV. Misunderstanding based on your cultural misunderstandings might be based on your language, might be misunderstanding, might be related with your dressing, the way you talk, the way you look. That might create a misunderstanding in some of the situations, or if you have a misunderstanding about the job as well. So this also create a problem for selecting a right candidate. Non-verbal behavior and impression management interviews inferences of the interviewee's personality from the way he or she acts in the interview have a large impact on the interviewer's rating of the interviewee. Clever interviewees attempt to manage the impression they present to persuade interviewers to view them more favorably. This is very good. More favorably persuade interviewers to view more favorably means that you have a good eye contact with the interviewer. This is a very important and very accurate analysis when you have a good eye contact with the interviewer. If you do not have a good eye contact with the individuals who are asking questions from you, that might create problems and troubles for the results and with effect of personal characteristics, attractiveness, gender, race. Interviews tend to have less favorable view of candidates who are physically unattractive, female, of a different racial background, disabled. These are some of the other things that, as earlier I explained it to you. Interviewer behaviors affecting interview outcome in advertently telegraphing expected answers, talking so much that applicants have no time to answer questions, letting the applicant dominate the interview, acting more positively toward a favored similar to the interviewer applicant. So these are some other things that is related with the questions and answer sessions. And if the applicant has not properly given the time, and if the interviewer asking more questions and discussing more than the what they ask from you. The structured situational interview is job analysis, rate the job's main duties, create interview questions, create benchmark answers, appoint the interview panel, and conduct interviews. I experienced that when the panel interview, in the panel interview, the panelists first discussed about the candidate's profile individually. Once they discuss the applicant's profile individually, they mark some benchmark questions or mark some benchmark answers as well. And they discussed after the interviewee left the place for after the interview. So they have some analysis on the benchmark, and they have reviewed the responses of the individuals, and then they related with the performance of the personality of the individuals. So in most of the cases, the panelists basically determined the benchmark, and based on that, they judge the individuals for the job. Structure your interview, base questions on actual job duties, use job knowledge, situation or behaviorally oriented questions, and objective criteria to evaluate the interviewees' responses. Train interviewers, train interviewers asking unbiased and very reasonable questions from the applicant. For example, for instance, that you called an individual from the remote areas, and you give them the invitations to come to the urban area from the remote area. And then you ask from that, how can you manage to come from the remote areas to the urban areas? This is a very irrelevant and a biased kind of a question, that you're not interested in the applicant. If you're not interested in the applicant, then why you call that applicant? Because applicants has a very negative sense when you ask that how can you manage a travel, how can you manage the from that you are very far away and this job is very far from your current place. These are not very much meaningful questions. In some of the context that give you an overview that how much the interview is very much serious for this job, this is relevant. But I believe that these questions cannot give you about the knowledge, about the skills, about the ability of an individual. This just give you an idea that how much that individual is serious or a non-serious in the for the job. So for me, it's a kind of the shows very much a non-seriousness from the interviewer in most of the cases, not in all of the cases, in most of the cases. Use the same questions with all candidates. Use descriptive rating scales, excellent, fair, poor. To rate answer, use multiple interviews or panel interview, control the interview, take brief, unobtrusive notes during the interview. These are some of the situational questions that you have to ask from the individual. Just review it. If you have any questions and if you have any ambiguity, please ask from me and then we will discuss it later. Then the other thing is that prepare for the interview, secure a private room to minimize interruptions, review the candidate's application and resume, review the job specification, put the person at ease, ask questions, follow your list of questions. Don't ask questions that can be answered yes or no. So ignore these questions. That is not very good related with it. Just go through it in this unstructured situational interview, job related interview, stress interview, panel, mass, candidate order error. And if you have any questions, so then we can discuss it later in a very detailed manner. This concludes over this chapter. Just listen my audio and the notes. And if you have any questions, I'm here to reply you and then we will discuss it in later in a very detailed manner. Okay, thank you very much.